Hello and welcome back. This is part 3, the final part of section 1.3 for Algebra 1. So there are a few things that we need to cover before we can move on. One of them is vocabulary words. There are a few vocabulary words that you might not remember for when you're working with fractions. One of them is reciprocal. So let's start with that one. What is a reciprocal? Reciprocal. Okay, well, Mr. O'Neill, of course, can't spell, but that's okay. The reciprocal is when you take a fraction and you flip it. For an example, if I saw 3/2, the reciprocal would be 2/3. This is, of course, the same thing as when we divide fractions, where we just flip and multiply. We're actually multiplying by its reciprocal. Reciprocal is Mathanese for flip the fraction. Another thing that we need to worry about is 0, because 0 is a very special number. It's a number that you can't really divide by unless you're Chuck Norris. So since none of us are Chuck Norris, and Mr. Norris, if you are watching this video, kudos to you, we need to be able to recognize the difference between multiplying by 0 and dividing by 0. So if we see 0 times a number, I'm using a as a number. This is a, of course, variable, and it can be any real number. So using a for any real number kind of makes sense, right? So if I take 0 times any real number, the output is always 0. What about 1, you say? Everything times 1 is whatever that number was. Well, what's 1 times 0? Well, it would be 0 because that's the number multiplying by 1. So it works for all numbers. 0 times 0, still 0. So 0 times any real number will always give you 0. But what happens when we divide by 0? Well, this is a very special case in mathematics, and it's something that we kind of understand, but not really. So when we kind of understand something, but not really, and we have no way to fit it in the model of mathematics, we call it undefined. So if we see a divided by 0, or any real number divided by 0, we call it undefined. So if we take 0 and we take its reciprocal, we end up with something that's undefined. So we have to be really careful when we're working with 0 and multiplication and division, because we can suddenly go from having a real number, 0, believe it or not, it is a real number. You can hold 0 apples in your hand. But undefined, there is no understanding of it that I can think of, and I'm pretty decent at mathematics. I've been doing it for a while now. But really, undefined is just that. It doesn't fit in our model, so we can't use it, so we call it undefined. Now we also have to worry about decimals. Now we already know that fractions are friends. Yes, fractions are friends. Please spread the word. But what about decimals? Well, to me, decimals are demons. They're little monsters that just make my life miserable. So when we're going to go into this, we're going to say decimals are not nice. I don't really like using decimals. I'll be honest with you. I'd much rather work with a fraction. Decimals can be misleading. Decimals can lie to you. They can do all kinds of wonderful things, and I'll prove to you that they can lie to you later in this video. So when we're working with decimals, I'd much rather work with just fractions, but sometimes you gotta work with the decimals because that's all you're given. So let's look at multiplying decimals. Let's say that we have something like 6.25 times 5.5. Well, how do we do this particular multiplication? Well, one, you could pull out your calculator and let it do it for you, in which case you'd be like, haha, I am smarter than average bear. I use that Stupid thumb. Come on. There we go. Aha! I am smarter than average bear. I have thumbs up because I am smart and able to do these things. And what happens when you don't have a calculator? Well, then you end up looking like our good friend here that just keeps on crying no matter what. Because you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. So here's what we do. To work with decimals, we first put the first decimal on top, in this case 6.25, and then we do long division, or not long division, but long multiplication, and we line them up and we say 5.5 on the bottom. And when we multiply these guys, we count how many things that we have to the right of the decimals. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3 things to the right of the decimal. That means that we are going to have 3 things before we can put our decimal mark down when we do our multiplication. So let's start with the first number in our multiplication. Let's start with this 5. When we're multiplying, we go 5 times 5 is 25. So I'm going to put a 5 here, carry the 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 1 is 31. Now remember, how many decimals did we have? Well, 1, 2, 3, 3 things to the right of the decimal. So I would go 1, 2, 3, and there's my first decimal point. Then we put a placeholder. When we put a placeholder, we put X, or 0, as a placeholder. 0 is often used as placeholders in a lot of places in mathematics, so I'm just going to get you in the habit of it. Use 0 as your placeholder. And then we use the other 5 to multiply. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 1 is 31. And then we add the two numbers together. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 5 is 7. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. And then there's a 3. And don't forget, the decimal goes down in alignment too. This is one of the reasons why I like doing math on graph paper, is because it helps me keep everything in alignment. This is especially useful for those of you who have dyslexia, like Mr. O'Neill does. It's a cool trick that makes you look smarter. So in this case, we have 34.375. Feel free to double check it on your calculators. But please note that you will not always have a calculator available to you, and there are some standardized tests where you're not even allowed to use it. So be careful. Remember to use decimals. Now what about adding decimals? Let's take a look at 2.5 plus 6.125. How do we add these two guys together? Well, just as before, we aligned them vertically with the decimals in the same column, the same vertical alignment. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to take 2.5, and then I'm going to take the second number and put it in alignment with it. In this case, 6.125. And then I just add straight up and down. There's nothing here. If there's nothing here, I put a 0 as a placeholder. Same with this slot right here. So 0 plus 5 is 5. 0 plus 2 is 2. 5 plus 1 is 6, decimal. 2 plus 6 is 8. So we would end up with 8.625. So remember, when you're working with decimals, align them up. Line them up. Put the decimals where the decimals are in a vertical alignment, and then put the numbers where you need them. If you don't have a number for a slot, use 0 as a placeholder. Other than that, it's just the same thing as adding and multiplying normal numbers. All right, thank you very much. Oh, I almost forgot. We need to have some practice, don't we? Well, in that case, here's your practice. Your practice for this particular section, 1.3, is going to be on page 23. And it's going to be numbers 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 15, 19, 23, 25, 27, 29, 51, 53, and 73. It might seem like a lot, but to be honest, a lot of this is stuff like what's 2 times 4? Yeah, it really is that easy. This isn't too large of a homework assignment. Not to mention that you'll be doing a lot of these in class, hence the term the flipped classroom. So if you have any questions, please feel free to bring them into class tomorrow. And remember that because we are going to something new for our standardized tests, word problems are going to be a big part of that. So next time, if you need to get some help with word problems and strategies on how to do word problems, look for the video on it. I will be making one shortly. In the meantime, good luck and have fun.